Good evening, and thank you all for coming. This is the first public meeting of the Guilford Facilities Task Force, although I will point out that we meet every other Thursday morning. We always have public comment sessions, and everybody is welcome to those meetings. But we thought we'd take this opportunity to explain to you our progress to date. Let me first introduce our task force members. I'm Gary McElhenney, the chair. Barbara Casey is our vice chair, was the vice chair of the school building committee, and she did such a great job there that we snagged her on to be vice chair here. Siobhan Towers Bennett, who is a land planner and facilities planner of renown, and we are very lucky to have her. Bob Hartman, who most of you know, pension committee, been around for a long time, born and raised in town. John Ireland, who also is a nationally known facilities planner, mostly with colleges and universities, but very applicable in this situation. Jason Markey, who couldn't be here, had a family emergency. And Bill Mulligan, who is just invaluable. He sets up our tech. We also watched him on the high school building committee and understand how valuable he could be, so I did a lot of shoehorning to get him on the committee. His wife wasn't real happy, but he's here. I did a little bit of math, and I found out that the average residency of the task force is 35 years in this town. Two of the members who were born and raised here. Two of us have held elected positions. Collectively, we've served on at least 22 boards and commissions. I think maybe a couple of us forgot a couple, but at least there, and 10 related boards and commissions in town which have some relevance to town facilities, land, etc. So that we brought a great deal of experience to this committee, and it's been rewarding for me to be able to have them all gather and produce the work we've done so far. The other person who couldn't be here, who is an invaluable member of the committee, is Steve Nydorf, the town facilities manager. He also, his aunt died today, and he couldn't be here, but he has been tremendously useful. He's tremendously knowledgeable. We started this process with a bus trip. We called Rick Maynard, got a bus. We all got on a bus with Steve Nydorf and toured all the town facilities. And it's very interesting when you see them all together. You know, we all see this facility or another facility, but we went on a trip with Steve primarily narrating the issues, what's been done, what hasn't been done, what could be done, and it was very revealing. The Board of Selectmen was so jealous of that, they made us do it again for them. And so we did it again for the Board of Selectmen. I think they'll say that was pretty enlightening to see them all together and to see them, to put them in that context. I will also say, I can't not mention our Secretary, Sally Berezowski, who has been with us all along. We have to do a little shuffling to get our meetings in so she can do her regular job. Thank you, Mitch, for being cooperative. But she's been invaluable. Our communications, our connections to all of the department heads and people that we need to talk to come through her, and she's been a blessing. I would also say that we have been very, very impressed with town employees. The level of helpfulness, knowledge, and dedication for our town employees is very revealing. They've been very cooperative. We've asked them to prepare, and we'll talk about what we've asked them to do, but we've asked them to prepare information. Most of them went above and beyond what we expected them to do. We've gone through town facilities, whether it was the department head or the mechanic in Public Works. Everybody was happy to show us around, tell us what they were doing, why it was important, and we were very, very impressed with the quality of town employees. The last thing I'll say before I sit down is this is a town that has a lot of complicated issues. A lot of our facilities are based on history, as we've discovered. Just to pick on this facility, it was built when the town was half the size. So now we got a parking problem because we've got twice as many people. Town hall, same issue. Library, same issue. They were conceived of when the town was substantially smaller, when there were many less of us, and as the town has grown, it's put a lot of pressure on a lot of facilities. There are some physical realities. We have septic, we don't have sewers, we have some locations with water, some without water, there are some locational issues. So we have discovered some very, very interesting things. And as many of you know, I've been around land acquisition for a long time. I was a selectman for 8 years. I learned a lot of stuff that I never knew before on this committee about the status of town properties, what happens in them, where they're connected to other town properties, or where there are problems just in their physical location, et cetera. So we are finding our way through those. We have we've made some recommendations to date. We have developed a lot of information, and we thought it was time to come to the public and see if there were other comments. I will tell you, a number of folks have stopped me on the street to offer their suggestions, which are welcome. But we thought we'd do it in a formal way, and so we're here tonight. Let's start off with Shawnee talking about our mission. And most people aren't as happy as I am to stand up at a microphone, so most of us are going to talk from there.
And I'm not going to read. It's self-evident that we've been looking at facilities, short and long-term suitability, relative to current condition, location, and programmatic need. Now, programs have changed. They've obviously expanded with more people. The part of programmatic requirement that we weren't thinking about when we first developed this mission is the regulatory environment, which is part of the program that these facilities need to meet. And part of the issues that we discovered were how they may or may not be meeting current need, and certainly what the issues are looking forward with, how we know that's going to change even more. We're trying to serve the community economically, socially, and environmentally. That's sometimes a balance, but we're trying to look at how all of those work to enhance the character, not change it. We're very much conscious of the history of the town, why it is the way it is, why it is that we live here. We are trying to see how we can preserve and be good stewards and be sustainable, both economically and environmentally, and both of those sometimes pose challenges. So, great.
Thank you, Bill.
Moving on to some of the specific goals that the task force has set forward. First we should say, Gary pointed out earlier, a lot of us have spent a good deal of time on other committees, task forces, councils within the town. There's a lot of good work that's already gone on in this town that we are able to use as a springboard for some of our considerations. One of which, in the first bullet point here, is the 2014 Plan of Conservation and Development. We are going to be working with them to support their goals, working off the basis of that plan to support the findings of that plan and the assessment reports that were completed in them. Second, I want to spend a minute talking about this one, perhaps, personally, perhaps the most important for me. We're looking for financial and operational efficiencies to be gained by the consolidation, the relocation of buildings and their functions. One of the things that this task force has agreed is that we do want to be very conscious of the effect that any recommendations we put forward would have on the tax burden in the town. right? I think that's a very important consideration as we go through this. I think there is perhaps, you know, if you just look at this title, you could say, oh, well, we're going to be accretive, right? We're going to add facilities to the, in our add recommendation, have a recommendation to add facilities to the town's tax base, and that's in fact not the case. We will be looking at where consolidation is appropriate, again, either for financial efficiency or for functional efficiency as well. We're going to obviously consider the programmatic implications of the population. As Gary mentioned earlier, the town has grown greatly over the course of the last few decades. Beyond just the sheer number of citizens, we've had a slightly aging population, something that we started to address a bit on the high school building committee, which Barbara and I are a part of, but has also been discussed amongst a number of the town committees and councils. As Shawnee talked about in the sustainability perspective, one of the elements that comes out of that is the impact of climate change. We aren't going to be making our own assessment of that impact. There have been others that have done that within the town, but we are going to be focusing on that as it does affect some current facilities in the town directly. So that's an important part of our consideration. The short and long-term needs of all departments are being considered. There are some immediate needs that have been identified. We've made recommendations, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, already to the Board of Selectmen, which they've started to take action on. But as we look at making our recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, it will have considerations for both the short term, which we've identified as pretty much the next 5 years or so, and the long-term considerations for the town. A lot of our decisions are going to involve either, perhaps relocation, perhaps new facilities, perhaps decommissioning existing facilities, perhaps selling off a facility, and those things obviously can't be done overnight. So some long-term perspective on this will be important. As I mentioned before, we'll be coordinating with other task forces and committees to ensure that we have a plan that is encompassing all of their good work. And as we make these recommendations to the town, it will be delivered in a final report. It will be delivered in a final report to the Board of Selectmen, which can lead us then to the timeline for this task force. We've been at this for really about a year at this point. We first started off surveying, as Gary mentioned, all the town properties. We've got, lost the diagram up there to perhaps the sleep schedule. If you don't mind, John, thank you. The diagram of the map of the town of Guilford there, we took that bus tour sort of last fall, and immediately following that with some sort of eye-opening revelations, we sent out a questionnaire to all of the department heads, several of which are in this room, asking for their perspective on what's working for them, what's not working for them, where they have perhaps some strategic concerns about their facilities. And that was completed this spring, April to be specific. We followed up on that with interviews of the department heads, the commission heads, all of those groups, and some of them brought a few participants to those meetings, which was very helpful. As Gary said, it was, I was very proud to be a resident of the town of Guilford. It was great to meet a lot of these folks that I hadn't met already, and to hear their perspective, to really get a sense of how committed they were to serving the town. It really was gratifying. This summer, we've submitted an update to the Board of Selectmen on our current status. As I mentioned, there were a few short-term recommendations that we made, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. This fall, we started to prepare an analysis of our findings, and one of the steps that it's included in that is this town meeting tonight, where we can get some feedback from you about thoughts you may have and some of the thoughts you may have on our recommendations. That will lead to an initial recommendation document to the Board of Selectmen later this fall and perhaps early winter. The final report isn't expected out until next summer, At that point, we hopefully will have incorporated all the feedback we received from public sessions like this tonight, as well as some of our deeper dives into some of the specific facility reviews, which should wrap up this task force's work roughly about a year's time from now. So that's a quick overview from the timeline.
As Bill said, we did go through this process of surveying and interviewing. We actually have the copies of those surveys and interviews here if anybody's interested in looking. We also studied all existing plans in the previous studies, so we tried to do our homework with all of the background work, and a lot has been done in past planning exercises to bring us to where we are today. We will be talking to other boards and the other commissions that have been established, other task forces, so that we make sure that this is coordinated. That's part of this next phase. And we will be doing further interviews. So I think that's.
I would just interject one thing at this point. We aren't funded, so we can recommend anything we want to recommend, and we have no money to do it. So this clearly, anything we do gets reviewed through the Board of Selectmen, through the Board of Finance, and the budgetary and financing process. So we don't have a blank checkbook. Our thoughts are our thoughts and our recommendations. We aren't committing anybody to anything. We don't have that authority.
I'll walk you through, this is sort of an interim business. I don't think you'll be surprised by anything that I'm going to tell you, but I will tell you that after we took our tour, we talked to a few people, and based on our own experience, all of these questionnaires that you so kindly filled out, we came up with some questions about your needs. A lot of things that came out were about storage, about environmental, about regulation. I've got to say, I agree with Bill. We had excellent and generous and complete cooperation from everyone that we spoke with. It was so refreshing and so wonderful and so constructive to see that there's no fiefdoms, no silos. It's a town of cooperation, and I think the moment that we lose this, we're going to start losing money and people. So the question sort of took, we looked at things environmental, of course, geographic, and demographic. You will all know, I see the people in the audience, 45 years ago when I graduated in 1975, there were more students in the school system than there are now, and the population was 14,000, which of course points to a great aging of the population, and we're aware that towns around us are losing population, so we're planning to see what our needs might be. So, of course, some of the things, you start with public works. It's notionally it's never flooded actually, but it's in a flood zone. Do we keep all those millions of dollars of equipment in the flood zone? I walked in, I don't know if this is true, but I said, when was this all put up? They said 1992. When was it declared a flood zone? 1991, which gives you a bit of a double take, but it didn't mean the same thing. It didn't quite mean the same thing then. And of course, they've had to deal with issues of seepage and pollution, and they're worried about leaching, safe storage of the salt. Some of the big, everybody seemed to have issues with vehicles. We need more garage space. We need a big wash station. The salt that's on the roads now is eroding our brand new trucks and equipment at a rate that's unprecedented. But when we do wash these things, what do we do with gray water? It can't just wash out into the ground. It goes into a great grand tank that costs us, I've heard all kinds of numbers, $4,400 and up to have pumped out and taken to Fairfield. What they do with it in Fairfield, I don't want to know. But the nice thing about all your cooperation, all these questionnaires that we got, you begin to get this sense of how everything sort of knits together. We had very few almost no personnel issues. We know that we need better facilities for some of the employees at the dump station, at the stump dump. We need an extra room for at the police station for maternal issues. It all began to knit together. But it came down, a lot of it was storage, and the library, the book storage. Everybody needs more storage. It's equipment, it's sports equipment, it's machines, it's trucks. The police have a big command unit that doesn't go under any roof that we currently own. Is that right? We've got the Park and Rec, we've got the senior bus that used to be under a roof, it's no longer under a roof, so when they drive it here, it's got snow on it, it's got to be closed, cleaned off, little things like this. Public Works down there is something like 6.4 acres. If you ask, they need more. They're at capacity. And we've investigated the area around to see what's going on. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. The old Public Works building on Boston and Graves, everybody wants that. We're going to have to come up with something to either rationalize that or perhaps provide more storage space in a pole barn somewhere else. And then of course a lot of this started with storage. Believe it or not, so many departments have paper storage beneath the town hall. And it's getting critical in some places. It's a funny thing about the state, Bill looked into this. The state law at the moment says that if it's on paper and you want to store it and you don't want it to be paper, it's got to be put on microfiche. Unless it's already digital, and then it's okay. So there are some good people in town working on getting that changed, see what we can do about this. And of course, we looked at social services, perhaps combining some buildings, something, if everybody's got to go for similar needs to similar facilities, should they be in more efficient setting? I don't want to get ahead of myself or take too long, so why don't you go from there?
Some other issues we have, which I would call generic, but we put them in grouping. Solid waste management. That includes the transfer station. I don't know how many of you have looked into it recently, but it breaks down periodically. The equipment can't be easily repaired, replaced. There's an issue there. As I said at the beginning, we don't have solutions for everything yet. We're still in the defining problems situation, but that's an issue. The stump dump. I mean, again, that's a storage issue. What are we storing there? Are we storing it correctly? Are we doing what we need with all of the solid waste that we're generating when Public Works cleans out the drains on the roads? Are we doing that correctly? So there's a lot of issues that need to be further examined. The marina. Most of us think that that's a very important facility and one that is part of the character of Guilford. They need to dredge. And where do you put the dredging spoils? And that's a very big issue for the marina. And a solution needs to be found. I mean, it's somewhere between the town, the state, the Corps of Engineers. I mean, they're all tied into that decision-making process, so we aren't going to probably come up with the answer, but I think we can define the problem and help the Marina Commission move forward to find what the appropriate answer is. You're talking about 2 years from now, right? Correct. It needs to be done fairly quickly. Sooner than 2 years, a year to 2 years. So I mean,
Yesterday.
It's a current issue that needs to be resolved. Parking's an issue. We don't have 100 people here tonight, but if we had 100 people, they'd be parking on the far side of the green and walking here. Again, this was built for a population that was half the size. This is Rick Maynard's fault. If he didn't do such a good job in utilizing this facility, there wouldn't be so many of us here as much. And I'm obviously being facetious, but all these rooms are used all the time. I tried to have a meeting here last week, just an informal meeting. We met in the chairs in the hallway because every room was being used at midday. So, it's a parking problem. We all know it. Downtown, both Town Hall South, the library, all those areas have parking issues. The town is working out something with the merchants behind Whitfield Street and St. George's, and that will take some of the pressure off. But it's a long way from the library, it's a long way from Town Hall. it doesn't solve all those issues. Adams School has a parking issue and has a bus movement safety issue that needs to be resolved. And I'm trying to avoid specifics, but many of you know that the little building that's used by social services was originally purchased to enhance the parking at Adams School. Well, before they got to do anything about the parking, we moved a department in there because they needed a place to go. So it wasn't available to enhance the parking traffic situation at Adams School. So we know that. It's on the list of things to try and resolve. The Church Street property, the one next door, was purchased for parking, and that is in process. But there are two questions that we have raised. Should it be 100% parking, or could there be a building which may be closer to the street, which may provide some street enhancement, and which may provide some services which are symbiotic to the community center? Again, we're better at questions than answers, but that's what we've done. Lathrop House. We know at some point that the Education Department is going to move, and what do we do with Lathrop House? On the green, historic property, may have market value, may have some conflicts. Combined septic system with the library, no parking of its own. So, these are the kind of complications. Boston Street, every department head wants a piece of that Boston Street property. It's the old Public Works, it's the old Ford dealership, it's near downtown. If you've gone in there, there's a lot of stuff in there that people keep. If we do something for Public Works and Park and Rec and solve some of the storage problems, do we free that up? Can we sell it, put it back on the tax rolls? Those are all issues that we're dealing with. And finally, and I notice one of our selectmen isn't here, but we've got the other land issue. If you look at this, there's all sorts of pieces of land floating around that appear to have no apparent use. Can we sell them? Should we sell them? Again, it gets complicated because some of them were created by engineering and zoning, and it was their water flow areas that were set up as part of a subdivision. And I'm aware of one because I tried years ago to get it sold or get it moved, and it turns out it was part of the engineering of a subdivision because that's a water course. So I mean, the selectman's office staff is accumulating all of the deeds, so we can look at some of this stuff. But I think we've kind of committed that we will come out of this with some way of trying to deal with and possibly sell some of the excess land that was acquired by foreclosures or other reasons that is of no use and in fact may be a liability to the town. So we're trying to deal with that.
And in fact, let me suggest that at some point, I don't know how many people have seen this, I had never seen this map in particular, but there's a map up here which you're more than welcome to come up afterwards and take a look at. It's got a key that tells you what the properties are in town, and some of them you'll probably be surprised at. So
Just
there you go. Thanks, Sean.
pass it around.
Pass it around if
Yeah,
you
feel
want.
free. Yeah.
Just make sure I get it back, please.
It'll be hard to put,
No fingerprints.
And you're doing the next one.
I'm doing the next
Yeah.
one. Other considerations, energy and sustainability. We have a committee addressing energy issues. We've done a couple of things. I think you know that we have bought the street lights and have converted them to LED, which A, uses less electricity, and B, saves money for the town. There are other issues. If we're creating new buildings? Will we be able to use solar panels or other ways of reducing our utility costs and becoming greener? So part of our next steps are to deal with some of these other task forces and committees that are dealing with those issues. Efficiency was mentioned by Bob. One of the things that was really clear on the bus trip and confirmed with Steve Nydorf with us is, we have these little pockets of facilities, which for the facilities department means they have to go to A to B to C to D. If they were consolidated, it would be a lot less costly, it would be a lot more efficient, and so consolidation is something that we are thinking about.
It's obvious to everybody that consolidation is the key. The problem is everybody knows the town isn't sitting on large tracts of conveniently located land that qualifies. So we've looked high and low for appropriate pieces that would work. Our commercial that are well situated, that we could sell something to move into them, or they're not surrounded by residential, and it's a little bit difficult. That's all.
We were going to take our money, Matt, and buy lottery tickets, and if we won, then we'd have enough money. No, I'm kidding, but all these things get answered with funding, but that's a planning process and it's a development process, and it's not going to happen immediately.
And we talked a lot about, we're still talking about short-term and long-term planning. Some things are much more immediate than others. Even if you take off the table the economic issues, which are enormous, you're looking at DPW, which has regulatory issues as well as they just don't fit down there any longer. So even if we were to figure out on all of these other bases what we would do with some of these properties, some things we have to take care of sooner rather than later. And that becomes part of that whole planning process, especially the efficiency issues. And the consolidation, there have to be some place for people to consolidate too. And that's the other part of the issue that we look at. The more that we spend time on this, the more complicated it becomes for us. But I think we made some recommendations. So I think we have done some things that I think will lead us to where we want to be. But I think we're going to come out of this probably with a lot of unanswered questions as well, or questions that get answered perhaps not in our lifetime. That's just how it is.
But I'd also like to say that while we're looking at current condition and current needs and optimal use, some of the efficiency of consolidation also has to do with the life cycle costs of some of the facilities we're in now. And since I volunteer at the food bank, I'll say that once upon a time was a chicken coop. It has an ancient boiler. Does it really make sense for the town to invest in a totally new mechanical system for that structure? That's just not good resources of the town. So as we look forward, we have to anticipate some of what we know will be costs in the existing facilities.
Exactly. That's a great example of something we don't want to do. It's sort of the 1991, 1992 issue. Sometimes what we're trying to do is figure out, is to make sure that one hand does know what the other hand is doing. And what we find out is that because as we're moving along in our timeline, other committees are moving along in their timelines too, as they should. So we're gonna try to somehow meld pieces of that. And as Gary said, we're a subcommittee really of the Board of Selectmen. So we don't have any street cred. We don't have any juice at all. And so, it's a matter of being nice to them. So if we think something's really, really important, we lobby for that. Are you ready for me to move to major recommendations? But we have done some recommendations to date because we felt like it was important that somebody figure out that we were actually doing something between the time we started and today. And one of the first things that we recommended was the paper storage and archival needs. We toured, in addition to our bus tour, we also went to the basement of Town Hall. It was, to say the least, fascinating. There are archival things that require archival storage sitting next to steam pipes and other boxes marked either with numbers or with just some, like Sally's done a super job with the HR stuff, but some things are next to others. There's not necessarily confidentiality down there. And so there's a whole lot of other storage and digital issues. The digitization that the state requires is ridiculous. I mean, to have them, and we have to keep the paper record, by the way. I don't think you said that, right? We have to keep the paper record even if we digitize them. So, I mean, that makes no sense.
Or we could lose them in a flood.
Or we could. Maybe
fire.
that's not a bad
Yeah,
idea. But those become some of the other issues. And do we store some of those things off-site? So we recommended to the Board of Selectmen that they put together some sort of a group to take a hard look at that. And I know they took that seriously and have done that. The other thing that we did was suggest as well that 52 Church be dropped along with the garage behind, and that there be a design-appropriate replacement. One of the things that Shawnee mentioned in the beginning was how important it is to us that whatever we recommend is in keeping with who we are. We've been here, all of us, a long time. We've lived in town, and we love it the way it is. And we want to make sure that even though we have to move forward with things, that we keep what we have in a way that is acceptable to all of us. So I think 52 Church can definitely be parking and or something else, a building perhaps. And there are ways certainly to design that to get the maximum efficiency from that. So we recommended that as well, and I know that's in process. Go ahead.
Just one of the other complications, it's in a historic district.
Oh, yeah, right.
So anything that gets done, and Shawnee and I went to the Historic District Commission meeting one night, and we sat there and we listened to them, and we told them what we were thinking about, and they told us what they were thinking about, but that's another complication. There's another, and not that it's not invalid, it just is another issue that needs to be dealt with, so.
Correct. And we're probably going to find others of those. That one we just happened to work on right away because the town had just purchased that property. And the other thing we've suggested is, and I think that's also in the works, and that's utilizing that barn behind Town Hall. One of the other issues DPW has is that anytime they want to do something, they have to move all the equipment through town to wherever they're going to go. You know, Guilford is this long town, as that board shows. It's 11 miles to get to the top of it. And so DPW moves through town every day, working on those things. So when we have snow plowing or other sorts of things like that that need to be done by them, they move their equipment up. It's nice to have a place behind Town Hall where Steve can store some of his short-term things like, you know, mowers and things like that. You'll notice when I say things like that, that's what, things like that. And the other thing we've really suggested is that, that the town put together a study committee for DPW's site. You know, a lot of towns have town campuses, so right now there's all kinds of things in play about that, to talk about what that might look like, but generally speaking, there needs to be someone to really focus on what's going on at DPW as well. And a group to do that would probably be a really good idea. So far, so good. Okay, that concludes really the sort of the meat of our presentation. And as a way of sort of giving you an idea of where we are, I would invite people up to comment, for public comment. What I'd love you to do would be to give us some ideas. One of the reasons we're here and we're on GCTV is so that we can solicit ideas from the public. Obviously, you all live here, you care about this place, you have ideas, or maybe you've driven by a building in town and wondered about it. That's one of the things we're trying to do, is collect information about those things. So, public comment, please announce yourself, what street you live on. You have 3 minutes to talk to us, and so I invite anybody who wants to come up to the podium.
4, 3,
Okay. Okay, you thought about it for a while, didn't you?
Now, why am I surprised?
My name's Bernard Lombardi. I'm a resident of Guilford, I guess, for the last 50 years. I live at 70 Reeves Avenue, and I'm chairman of the Marina Commission. And it's on behalf of the Marina Commission that I am here. We don't need storage, but we need depth. We need support for any dredging program that we have. And that dredging program is repeated about every 6 years. We have an incredible facility that serves many, many town residents from both pleasure boating, boat launch areas, and just coming down to the marina to watch. It's a beautiful space, and it's well used by the community. So we need support, and that's it. Thank you.
You do have ours, absolutely. Wow. All right. I'm feeling like I need to go out to the street and haul people in.
Joe Nugent, 98 Cedar Hill Road. When a lot of these changes take place, I think it's important for the town to emphasize the use of solar energy. If you drive up to our neighbors up in Durham, you hit Route 17, the first thing you notice is that firehouse with solar panels all on the south side. I'm quite sure they pay zero electricity to operate that building. And that's what the town of Guilford has to do when they implement these changes. I don't know of any solar panels that the town of Guilford has. And they should, really. If you look at our fire department, the main fire headquarters, the discussion came up about putting solar panels on there, and they said the roof wouldn't handle the load. I don't think that's true. Solar panels have changed in the past 20 years. They're a lot lighter, but we should try and get off the grid or minimize our use on the grid, and that will pay for some of the changes that you want to implement. Let's go solar. And I'm not in the solar business, by the way.
And we actually probably didn't emphasize that enough, but that's been on our agenda several times too. We agree completely. I think some of the schools in town do have solar panels on them, but you're right. In fact, we have the king of solar panels sitting in the front row.
This is true.
Mr. Bishop. But yes, you're absolutely right about that. And that also leads us to, we can't just give you recommendations that are always cost money. We need to find other ways for efficiency too, and that is definitely one of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, Phil Johnson, 472 Whitfield Street. I looked at the map pretty closely regarding all the town-owned properties, and I didn't notice any reference to fire stations. We have a bunch of fire stations, and I'm curious whether or not there was any consideration for economies of scale for potentially combining some of them into other locations, and or as opposed to having lots of little ones. I know we have one main one now.
Yeah. We did bring in the fire chief, and their department did fill out a survey, and we did interview him, and we have had discussions about that as well. So thank you, and it is on the list for sure.
But again, if you, in the area of complications, the fire stations are owned by the volunteer fire company.
Thank you.
They are not owned by the town.
That's why they're not on this map.
That's why they're not owned.
Correct.
However,
Right.
they are funded
But-
by the town. There are costs to the town to manage for utilities and other sources. So yes,
Yes.
we are aware of it. Thank you for your thoughts, but it becomes another little part of the puzzle on how that works, and what right do we have
Efficiency-wise,
to take
though,
over?
if we go back to what Joe was talking about, efficiency-wise, you're absolutely right. I mean, those are big buildings, some of them sit empty for part of the time, so you know, it is reasonable to take a look at them and to make some recommendations about what to do with them.
I wear another hat or two in town, so another quick question. With respect to the property next door, how is that currently zoned, and will that go commercial versus mixed use now? Will that?
Residential now. I don't have the answer. Well,
Sorry, I wanted to throw that out.
Are we sure?
but it had a home business, so
Okay.
yeah.
So it'll probably be a town referral?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Everybody wave at Lou.
Mr. Bishop.
Good afternoon, Keith Bishop, 25 Meadow Ridge Lane. I stand before you, I guess, with my title of Land Acquisition Chair, currently, and representing that commission. Thank you for having the public hearing. It canceled our meeting tonight. And I do have some representation of our committee that here is in the audience to listen in input. Appreciate you guys' service and what you're doing here. Seen your faces before, and my tenure at the Board of Ed and going through our facilities and getting to the high school piece of it, and the consolidation there has been a great thing for the town, and what the savings over the long term for that facility had put together over what the 1957 plus additions had done on the high school. My comments are that the Land Acquisition Commission operates reporting directly to the Board of Selectmen with no budget other than the approval process through the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen for what we bring forward. Gary made reference to a couple of things that we have brought forward that do have an impact already and how they get used in the future. One is the house next to Adams School that was purchased as far as additional parking and space there for an expansion of Adams. More recently, the one next door to here, again, for that same long-term vision of what we want adjacencies to try and have as close to a town campus as possible, where we can acquire properties that would have some synergy going forward. My vision is looking out for decades and centuries ahead, not having a short-term tunnel vision of what we need. That can have some impact on cost in the near future of significantly higher for capital acquisitions versus the actual needs now. But our forefathers gave us what we have here. We've continued to use them, outgrow them, and we need to look forward to what's going down the road. Population most likely is not going to be forever stable or flat as it's been in the recent decade. Will we get back to students and having a high school class of graduating seniors of toward 400 like it was back in the peak in the mid-'80s? Most likely not, but we need to be planning ahead. So we're working in concert with the Board of Selectmen. We've got priority properties and things that we're looking at for synergies. I provided some information to the committee here before, and they started their work when we looked at the high school and doing the possible new high school. We looked at all potential sites in town that might have enough acreage for the high school. That included combined together multiple parcels that were adjacent that might have it. But again, our limitation of lack of city water in many locations in the town, as well as no septic disposal systems except on site, and having DEP approval for those types of things on large scale really limited us. So with that in mind, the Land Acquisition Commission has been continuing to work toward solving some of the space needs. 3 minutes? I'm a town official. I'm taking Matt's half hour.
You're using up all your time joking.
Okay. So to sum up then, Barbara, in 3 minutes or less, we're working and looking at identifying what needs are, what potentials here then can fit some of the recommendations that will be coming out of the task force to solve some of those problems. Everything will have some sort of long-term budgetary impact to do it. So that's, I guess, my biggest note here is that we do need to be prepared to fund the future in some regard, and how that fits into our town budget process, being able to get efficiencies that were mentioned here of savings, of some consolidation that can help us over that hump is where we're at. So with that, thank you, unless you have any questions to extend my time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Keith.
Hi, Rick Maynard, Parks and Recreation Director. I got a comment and a question. Just an example today, and you all know we have a parking issue here. Today there were 40 cars parked in places where they shouldn't be today, and this wasn't even a really busy day in the community center. But just an example. And a question, I'll make an assumption, I think I'm right, but I want to be sure. You talked about Public Works and you're including Parks and Rec garage in that also, correct? Because
Yes,
you know
we
what our
were.
space is.
Yeah, we didn't mention it.
So I want to be
yet,
sure
but
that
you're
was
right.
all.
Absolutely.
In fact, when we first interviewed Rick, the more we looked at it, we split his interview in two, his survey in two, one being rec and the other being public, you know.
And the other being park.
Park, because of all the fields that you mow.
Right.
And versus what goes on in the programs in this building. Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely.
And the storage and the
Storage,
mechanics.
all the equipment.
The
Yeah.
mechanics from Public Works do your stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
We are very aware of the symbiotic relationship there.
It works so good,
Yeah.
having us all together is a good
Yeah.
thing.
And that's another reason for consolidation being such a good idea,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, let's face it, one place to go for your mechanics, one place to fuel, one place to wash, one place for offices, one place for.
It does make
you know,
sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
Brush your teeth there, whatever you want to do.
it'd be great, be great.
Right. Okay. Are we done?
No,
No?
I think our first selectman.
You start the timer.
Let's say.
Yeah, start the timer.
Please. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Please identify.
For the record, Matt Hoy, 32 Seaview Terrace at night and 31 Park Street during the day. And as I think you all know, it's my distinct pleasure to be in that role, and I'm having a great time. I'm largely having a great time because there's so many wonderful people in this community, and I want to specifically thank all of you for having stepped up and volunteered to do this. Despite Gary's contention earlier, it didn't take a lot of cajoling. These are public servants and people who are concerned about their community and willing to invest their time, their talents, and their passions to ensure that we have the best that we can offer to our citizens. You guys talked a little bit about some of the updates. There are some progresses, things that are in progress is starting to happen. So you mentioned the funding. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance have allocated some funds for a couple of these projects. We have the funds in place right now to take care of 52 Church Street. If you haven't seen it already, we're anticipating a pretty healthy surplus once the auditors finish, and the Board of Finance has agreed with the Board of Selectmen that to utilize some of those tax dollars that have already been collected, and rather than have them sit on the sidelines, to reapply them. And we've done that in a couple of areas. There are, in particular, Tom's pretty happy. We're going to put some money back into some roads that have been neglected due to the budgetary pressures over the years. But more importantly, I think we allocated $400,000 for town facilities. So there are some demonstration projects or early wins, whatever it is, that we're going to be able to take as a result of this. Because I think we all talked about this at the first meeting. The last thing we want is a report that sits on a shelf, that doesn't get acted upon until such time as there's an emergency and something has to happen. The example I'd like to give is the coastal resilience plan that we have in place. That was a plan that was put together, I think, in 2012 or 2013, and we had 3 road elevation projects targeted in that study. Those were all completed. So that's the kind of action I think we're going to be able to get out of this. I'm not foolish to assume that the price tags are going to be easy for anybody in the community to absorb. But as Keith said, this is the investment in the future that we're going to need to have to make. Yeah. So that's my 3 minutes, and I'll cede back the balance of my time to the good gentleman from Bishop's Orchard. But nonetheless, my heartfelt thanks, and we're looking forward to more good things coming out of this commission. So thank you very much.
Thank you. 10 seconds to spare.
And now that I'm feeling guilty because I was so hard on Keith, I also know that we'll probably be talking to you a lot about the solar panels, because we are going to have to address that at some point in terms of the town.
Yeah, just a note on that. We, in December of 2017, the town and the Board of Education combined entered into an energy performance contract with Johnson Controls, which had done a significant amount of the evaluation on the appropriateness of solar use in town. There are some facilities that can't withstand it. There was a roof here that needed to be replaced. So we will be looking again at solar on this facility.
There you go, Jim. Great
Now,
answer.
I believe six of the schools now have solar,
I think it's-
solar panels on
I think
them
it's
at this
16.
point
I just didn't wanna say
as
that.
part of that process. But there are still other facilities that we need to take a
That's
look at.
great. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Okay.
Well, anybody?
Is there another source of funding besides the town to implement some of these programs?
There
Either
probably
state
are.
or federal
No
that you're
doubt.
aware of?
Yeah.
I presume there may be for solar, some solar programs. There are some state programs for land acquisition. We'll find out.
Even possibly for digitizing a lot of your paperwork because of security issues now where hackers are getting into town websites and stuff like that, that.
I
There
think there'll be,
I'm sorry.
I think there'll be an opportunity to look for specific grant opportunities, reimbursement opportunities, once we have a final plan in place with recommendations.
One of the things that I'm familiar with from New Haven is that there are also a lot of state grants for historic commission districts. A number of our properties are in historic commission districts, so it may be that if we decide we can keep a building or do something with it, there may be some matching dollars for that too. So, okay.
Anybody else? The last thing I will say, both to members of the commission, is thank you, and we have a meeting 2 weeks from today at 8 o'clock in Town Hall. And to those listening out there in the public, that we have a public forum availability every meeting. You're always welcome to attend.
Gary, if I could, if after tonight you have other ideas come up, other suggestions, guilfordfacilities@gmail.com would be a great place to send those. We will be monitoring that regularly, and we'd love to get any additional feedback you may have.
That's great. Yeah, cool. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
All right.